Welcome everyone to the AFL DK Down Under show, presented by Daily Fantasy Rankings in conjunction with rotogrinders.com. I'm your host here, Smatho 10, and alongside me is Big Hef, and we are here to break down round 5 AFL action. We are going to start with the Thursday night game between the Carlton Blues and the St Kilda Saints at Marvel Stadium. DraftKings have put out a nice $50,000 sticks contest for DraftKings players to get us stuck into. Hef's with me today to break down this particular slate. And before we get into the slate, actually, I've been receiving a lot of feedback through our Rotogrinders Discord chat, which you can find on rotogrinders.com, about some basic principles of lineup building, especially for single lineup DraftKings AFL. Do you want to inform the viewers of a couple of tips as we go through our series of videos throughout round 5, mate?
Sure. Well, I guess the two things we've got a lot of feedback on is stacking and correlations, which is obviously big for a lot of the American sports and a lot of the American DFS players over there wanting to get into. In terms of stacking for AFL, you'll notice that you only have to have one player from one side. They'll let you have 8 players from the one team in the one lineup. And when one team in AFL has a big win, they can often really dominate the ball. So in games like that, stacking can be really valuable. We've talked about this on the show last year, some of our episodes, the concept of the rising tide, that all the weaker members, I guess you could say, from the winning team, their scores, they all get brought up because the team shares the ball so much. So we haven't had too many blowouts so far this year, but when we do see one team win by a massive margin, you'll find that stacking that winning team is a really strong play. The other point of correlations, we do have a correlations tool on the website, don't we, Smatho?
Yes, we do have the correlations on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au, and head to our data tools section there. You'll be able to look up the correlations table where you can find out if any particular players who score well, the player also scores well. And then there are times where a bad correlation shows that if you've got a player who scores quite well or quite bad, then it does the opposite to the player in the correlation. I wouldn't call it a hard and fast rule per se. Every game is different, every opponent is different, but you can get a general feel that if a particular player plays well, especially in the same position, another player usually scores at the same rate. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's not like I know NFL is very big in correlating positions, but it doesn't work quite the same as that. But you will find 2 backmen on the same team may correlate really well together. They tend to share the ball together when they're in possession. The same thing will go for midfielders. Some midfielders correlate really well together. Some actually correlate negatively, where one midfielder has a good game that'll take away from their teammates' game. So definitely check out that tool and have a look at the numbers there. We obviously work with some smaller sample sizes in AFL footy, and there's always a couple of different roles to keep in mind. But if you're looking to get amongst correlations, there definitely is some value to them. So get on there and play around with the numbers.
Some simple rules that I tend to use in my lineup building is if its side is a big favourite, I look for their forwards. If a side has a dominant ruckman, I usually pick a ruckman and probably the best midfielder, premium player on that particular slate. Well, if the game is a bit more balanced, then obviously that correlation kind of breaks down and there's no real correlation in your lineups.
I will have one more point on the stacking too. It's not always the team that wins that accumulates the most fantasy points either. Sometimes we might have a team that the back line, they chip it back and forward, the ball around the back line, and so all their defenders and their defensive midfielders getting back involved in that as well. They can all rack up the points together, and in that case, stacking one team might pay off where it might not be the same case on the scoreboard. So Collingwood have been a really big one for that in the past couple of years. We've had some games where their defence has really racked up the ball without giving the opposition much of a look in, but it hasn't paid off on the scoreboard. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
If you've got any further questions for lineup building tips, anything on DraftKings, make sure you send us a line on our social media pages such as @Rankings DFS on Twitter. We're also on Facebook as well. And as I said, we're always on the Discord chat on ridergrinders.com. So drop us a couple of questions and we'll be able to get to them throughout the weekend. So, Hef, let's get stuck into some footy then. So, round 5 starts on Thursday night here in Australia, which we have the Carlton Blues, who are currently outsiders at +125. They're taking on the St Kilda Saints, who are favourites at -154. Currently, the total is at 129.5, and the spreads are just at a goal at 6.5 points. We're playing at Marvel Stadium, which is the indoor arena, the indoor stadium, so there are no issues with weather for this particular game. Obviously, in team news, there is some big news here with Carlton missing Jack Silvani due to a rib injury. Also, forward Harry McKay for Carlton could possibly be back in the side. For St Kilda, Zach Jones, who's one of their midfielders, suffered a hamstring injury from Saturday. He hasn't been ruled out just of yet, but is unlikely to play. Also, one of their other midfielders, Jake Gresham, copped an eye injury, but he's on track to play on Thursday night. Also, we might have to look out for is the ruckman, Paddy Ryder. He was a late scratch last week due to soreness. We're not too sure in terms of his availability for this week, so keep an eye on the teams, which you'll be able to find on the league's website, which is afl.com.au, and they'll be released at 24 hours prior to the match. Make sure you get the Daily Fantasy Rankings as well. Our cheat sheets there ready to go for DraftKings, so you can check out all our projections and our last 5 games. So, Hef, let's build a core of a team for DraftKings here, and as always, we always start with the rucks. Currently, we do have 2 definite options and a possibly third with Paddy Ryder. So let's assume that he is in for now. What are your leans here in the rucks?
If Paddy Ryder's in, then I'm leaning to the Carlton ruckman here, Mark Pitternet. Pitternet, if he's in particularly good form. Basically, just because he has the ruck to himself, so he'll play the majority of the time in there. He'll get a bit of a hand from Levi Casbolt, I guess, to give him a bit of a rest, but he won't have to share his time in the ruck, which is where our ruckmen really score the most of their points. But for Rowan Marshall and Paddy Ryder, they tend to have a 50-50 split there in the ruck when they play together, and that really hurts their fantasy output. Ryder considerably cheaper than Marshall. On that basis, I'd almost lean to Ryder as a better play than Marshall in that case as well. Should Ryder not play, then the Marshall comes right into it. And I think they're really well priced in that case, actually, if they both go one out. And I'd find it hard to split the better play.
I would say in cash, if Ryder does not play, you should go with Marshall. If Ryder does play, you should go with Pitternet in your cash builds, and probably some GPP on Ryder just in case he bobs up. More ruck work and more opportunity. All right, so let's move on to the defence, and we've got one of the highest priced fantasy players in the small history of AFL on DraftKings. This is Sam Daugherty, 9,300. He is currently the league's leading fantasy scorer in the defender position. He plays this halfback role where he takes a lot of marks and a lot of small kicks to other teammates. So it's a very fantasy-friendly game. Is it simple him clicking his name and eating his salary, or do we look elsewhere along these defenders here, Hef?
Yeah, I don't think it is as simple as locking them in for 2 reasons. First of all, 9,300, that's we're talking Brodie Grundy levels of salary there, which in a vacuum, his scores, if anyone is sort of up to it, it's Daugherty, but we've got an issue here with a St Kilda player called Jonathan Marsh, who in the past couple of weeks has done some very negative roles on opposition defenders, where he's just followed them around all game. Rather than playing as a forward and trying to kick goals, he's trying to negate the output of the opposition's better defenders. And in terms of Carlton's defenders, Sam Daugherty is the obvious guy that you'd think he might go to. So we've been up and down in predicting our tags so far this year, but if Marsh does go to Daugherty, then I think we're going to need a miracle from Daugherty to hit value at that $9,300 price tag. So on that basis, and the fact that I don't think you can't really go too badly if you fade Dougherty at 9,300. Like, he's not going to get 200 and blow you totally out of the water. I'm leaning towards not playing Dougherty for that reason.
Speaking of Marsh, he's actually quite cheap at 3,200. So if you find himself around Dougherty, and obviously he's going to be around the ball that much, there could be some fantasy scoring through tackles or through intercept marks or even bobbing up for kicking a goal, etc. So could we go to the cheaper players such as Marsh and even Williamson from Carlton at 3.9?
Yeah, that's a good point with Marsh. Obviously, these guys with their negative roles, they can pick up a few tackles when their player they're sticking close to gets the ball. And often these defenders, these attacking defenders like Dougherty, they don't pay these guys much attention when the other team's got the ball. So he could always bob up for a goal or two as well. So at that price, it's hard to see him really wreck your lineups with a low score. Williamson's definitely my favourite cheap guy from the Carlton back line. He sort of missed the boat on him. He had a really good game last week, and people are going to be more aware of him, but he's a guy that Carlton fans have had a bit of an opinion of for a while, and I think he's still very reasonably priced.
All right, let's put in Williamson in our little core here, and we'll move on to the midfield. Now, we talked about tagging with Dougherty. There's also another potential tag with Carlton's Patrick Cripps. A player named Jack Steele has been doing some shutdown roles from time to time. It's not an absolute given, but Cripps has not exactly set the world on fire fantasy-wise, but at that particular price point, I'm feeling a bit not great about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't like playing these high-priced guys when there's the potential for someone to be sticking with them. Jack Steele's not a guy who really pays full attention to his opponent. He's quite happy to run around and get the ball himself when it's there to be won. But still, just the fact that he might be paying closer attention to Cripps can take away some of the easy points that these midfielders can get. So 8,500's definitely priced up there for Cripps. I'm leaning towards playing less Cripps than more in my lineups. And on the flip side, even though Steele gets given a job, he does respond really well to these jobs and he's a fantastic tackler and he can find the ball himself. So he's definitely in play for me, Steele.
Also, I'm looking here, some cheap players actually have sprung out everywhere. I'm looking here on DraftKings at the moment. I'm seeing Ed Kerno at 6.6. He's been spending pretty much every centre bounce attendance for Carlton this year. I'm also seeing a bit of Sam Welsh from last week. He scored 90-odd fantasy points at 5,800. And even from St Kilda, there's Dan Hanbury, which is more of an outside player, but he's around that 5K mark as well. So I'm seeing that with Zach Jones out of the Saints side, is there any opportunity for Saint mids to come to the fore, or should we trust the Carlton mids as a underdog?
Yeah, if Zach Jones, with him not playing, there's a spot in that inside midfield group for St Kilda for someone to take. So Dan Hanbury, really well priced, 5,200. He was one of the leading midfielders in the league going back a couple of seasons ago. So the ability is there. One thing we also need to think about is Ed Kerno. He generally has a tagging job himself. He might go to... Well, you can sort of look at a guy like Billings or Hill that is probably the most damaging for St Kilda, but they play out in the wings. So he might even look to an inside guy, Ed Kerno, or if they decide there's no one for him to tag, he's more than capable of scoring 100. And at 6,600, that's a really good return.
Is there anyone cheaper than this 5K price tag that we can plug in, or should we try and pay up for you?
There's a guy, Jack Nunes, at 4,300, who's getting a bit of a friendlier role at sort of half back for Carlton. And if the attention does come to Sam Dougherty from Marsh, Carlton are going to have to be looking towards someone else to help them get that ball out of defence, and Nunes might be a guy to capitalise on that.
There's a couple under 3K that we might need to monitor depending on team selection. For Carlton, we had Sam Phillip at 2,800 made his debut. He only scored 20 fantasy points, but as Hef likes to say on previous DK Down Under shows, second up could be a possibility. There's also news that Saints might spring a debut for either Ryan Birds or Jack Bytel. They're both under around that 3K mark as well. So you have to consider them. If they get the selection, they can bob up for 40 to 45 fantasy points there. All right, so let's move on to the forwards. And one of the underrated stars of the competition this year is playing on Thursday night, which is Levi Casbolt. Hard to say that. I'm a big Carlton fan, and having Levi Casbolt being the third highest fantasy scoring player for Carlton through 4 rounds of the AFL is a little bit hard to say. But at 74.5 per game and at 5,200, surely we can get a bit of Levi in our lives here, Hef.
Yeah, he's definitely priced better here than he is over on Draft Stars, that's for sure. And he's a very mobile player, Casbolt. He's a big fella. He's a pretty average kick for goal, but he can take a mark and he can get involved in the play. So I think at 5,200, he's definitely in play. If we see Jade Gresham play, I really like that you can select him here as a forward. 6,200 is a very reasonable price. I think he's one guy who's going to get even more time through the middle with Zach Jones out. So he's a guy that I'm really keen to play, provided he comes up well with that from that eye injury. And then as we start to look down the list a bit more, there's a defender actually for St Kilda, Ben Long, who's named here in the forwards at 3,900. As we talked about before about stacking and correlations, if you're looking to play some St Kilda defenders in your lineup, you can use Ben Long here in the forward to give you an extra defender and hope that they really spread the ball around down back.
Tell me about Michael Gibbons' role change at Carlton. Obviously, he's bobbed up for some serious fantasy point scorer in the last couple of games. Still affordable at 5,500. I'm fearing that a lot of sharp people will be clicking on his name here at that particular price. Is he good for cash, or should we just a GPP play only?
He's still reasonably priced here, Gibbons, considering he's had 3 games of 70-plus points in a row. He's not getting that time in the middle of the ground that you'd love to see from a cash option, but there's no doubting his effort, that's for sure. He's not the most highly skilled player in the competition by any stretch, but he'll get in there and have a crack. Whether he's a cash option, I'm not so sure, but I think I wouldn't want to be loading him up in my tournament teams, but he's definitely playable.
Anyone that you want to load up in this particular line, or just have a little sprinkle everywhere?
I think I prefer Gresham of all of them, to be honest.
Excellent. All right, so we'll make sure you get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. We've got further slate previews for this particular match and also access to our AFL Data Tools on the site, which are all for free. And then also make sure you get to rotogrinders.com for our specific DraftKings preview with LineupHQ projections all loaded in for this particular match. Hef and I will be back for the next edition for Friday Night Footy, which is the traditional game between Essendon and Collingwood. As always, drop us a line here at Rankings DFS on Twitter or hit us up on Facebook as well. Hef, thanks for your thoughts today on this particular match.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Look forward to the next edition of the DK Down Under Show. See you then.
Cheers.